I'm Larry Karaszewski, nominated tonight for The People vs. O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story, with my partner Scott Alexander.
This is not your first story about someone. You've done something on Ed Wood and also on Larry Flynt as well. What attracted you to this story?
This story, it's funny because this is the first time Scott and I have ever written television, and we would have, basically we do movies, and would have done this story as a movie because as a 2-hour package, it would have just been telling people what they already know. But what we thought was really interesting about the O.J. Simpson trial was all the offshoots of it, all the themes that we could discover inside the piece, whether it's gender politics or class relations or the birth of the infotainment culture, and of course the sort of the black problems with the LAPD, and so there was just so much we could do with it that 10 hours felt like the proper medium for this story.
Were you in Los Angeles during the whole trial and the Bronco chase?
Absolutely. I remember exactly where I was at the Bronco chase. I think we all remember where we were during the Bronco chase. We were writing a script for Disney at the time, and it was before cell phones, and it was before all those things. And as everyone was leaving the building, there was the janitor downstairs had a little black and white TV, and it was like O.J. Simpson's being chased, and so the entire building all circled around the janitor's closet and watched the Bronco chase in his closet.
Do you remember the day that the verdict came out and just the feeling around the city? Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
So how did this opportunity come to you?
One of the producers on the project, a guy named Brad Simpson, was in a used bookstore, and he saw Jeffrey Toobin's book, and said, and this sort of like little thing in Brad's head where he was like, I should take a look at this. Maybe it's time to revisit the O.J. Simpson trial. And he went and read the book, and it's a terrific book. Jeffrey is also nominated tonight. This is a great thing about this particular award show is that it actually gives the person who wrote the book the award as well as the person who adapted them. The second we heard about it, it was one of those things we've been looking for a long time to figure out what would be the thing we do in television. And Scott and I are usually very deliberate about our decisions, about what kind of projects we take. And the second we were like, yes, get us in the room there. We want to take on Toobin's book.
So from that time that you met with the one gentleman and the used bookstore and all that, how much time has passed since really till you got the show on the air?
It was a very long time. We didn't treat it, like traditional television. We really developed it and researched it. And so it was about 3 years to got on the air, and now it's been a year since it's been on the air. So.
Okay. Now, when you wrote, let's say, the beginning, episode, did you have other people look at it for a tone and making sure that whatever your own bias was or your partner's bias was not put onto the writing or in the writing?
I would say we definitely had other people take a look at it, but we have our own tone. So I actually don't think it was about us taking our take away from it. We were never coming right out and saying whether he did or didn't do it, but there's so much evidence that sort of point in that direction. We were just sort of presenting the case, and we have a very unusual sort of a satiric comedic tone but the tricky thing on this thing was 2 innocent people died, so you didn't want to have that, you never wanted that to be any kind of source of humor, but there's a certain absurdity that was the O.J. Simpson trial, and having the Kardashians be a part of it and things like that. So we were always conscious of trying to keep our tone, we had always had great advice, and we had some co-writers with us all the time to sort of keep us honest. And it was very important to us to tell the truth, but just to do it in a very entertaining way.
I know all of the legal team became their own celebrity, from it, Judge Ito included. How much research did you do and watch videos on, Marcia Clark or whoever?
We did an insane amount of research. There was Jeffrey Toobin's book, but every single person involved in the trial wrote at least one book, maybe 2 books, sometimes 3 books. There's thousands and thousands of pages of court transcripts. There's hours of court TV. So it was really just the most intense research project we ever had, even the jurors wrote books.
Right. So when you write a screenplay, do you think that it's finished after 2 drafts? how critical are you of your own work or your partner's work?
Well, we're very critical of our own work because by the time it gets to even say his first draft, that's probably actually number 10 for us. We've gone through it so many times, and so we we generally sometimes prefer the earlier drafts because they're the kind of the most pure. But we've been in this business a long time, so we know we do whatever it takes to get it on the air.
And what book can you recommend to some of the viewers on screenwriting structure or just adaptation? Anything that filmmaking?
No, I don't really have. I certainly in the old days I would look to something like Sid Field. But I have no idea whether that would actually, be someone in today's climate would do. I would recommend a book that we wrote, which is our screenplay for Man on the Moon, the Jim Carrey movie about Andy Kaufman. We not only include the screenplay, but we include sort of a very in-depth how things were changed for the screen, and I think it's one of the best. Young screenwriter can really look at that book and understand how a script changes from when you write it until it makes it on the screen.
And lastly, what film have impacted you in terms of like a true crime or something, like an Errol Morris film, like Thin Blue Line, or different ones that are in the similar genre as what you've done?
I mean, as a young man, I saw, the black and white version of In Cold Blood, Richard Brooks' movie of that, and that definitely had a gigantic effect on me. It terrified me, and so that was the first thing that came to mind. Certainly David Fincher's Zodiac is an extraordinary film. That's an extraordinary film because it's about not solving the crime. And it's about how unsettling that is, where the fact that, no matter how horrific true crime stories tend to be, at the end there's some kind of closure. And Zodiac is about not getting that closure and what that does to a person, how it tears you apart. So I think it's a very interesting film.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Eric Olson, I'm here for Man in the High Castle.
Eric, how many years did it take to get this television show made, and how did it finally happen?
Well, I was hired to join the show for season 2. I know from the novel, which was written decades ago, the producers of the original producers of the series struggled for many, many years to bring it to the screen. It was a long development process, over a decade. So I was fortunate enough to be brought on in season 2.
Okay. Had you already watched the show?
Oh yes, I'd watched all of season 1, and I came on board and ended up being the head writer of season 2.
So do you remember when you sat down to write, let's say, I don't know if you did a spec script for them or how the process was, but what was the first presentation of your work you presented to these people?
Well, I had written on 15 other television series prior to Man in the High Castle, so my work was kind of known. I'm also an executive producer, so they knew I could handle a lot of the other aspects that go along with writing a big television show like this. But the thing that I'd written that probably put me most in contention, I'd written a pilot about Nazi-occupied Paris. Which was a historically based pilot. And so I think a lot of the folks read that and said, oh, he knows how to do a Nazi show.
Okay. What are your first steps for writing a screenplay? Do you have a sort of a tried and true set of rules that you use, or no? Everything's different, every project's different?
Well, my process evolves every time I do another job. I realize how much I didn't know in my prior job. So I'm somebody who reads pretty much every trick, every screenwriting book, every script that I can get my hands on, and I'm constantly trying to evolve as a craftsman. I also am fortunate enough in this job to surround myself with really talented people, and you learn a lot from other writers. Like, there were writers on Man in the High Castle who won Emmys, or Martin Scorsese's best friend is another one. You want to really kind of learn from the people around you, and that just makes you better. So I can't say that I have any set process, although right now, as I'm developing something, I have to say I'm a big fan of the John Truby stuff. I think he kind of hits a sweet spot for me. But I've taken them all. I've taken McKee. I've taken everyone. I'm one of these guys who likes to learn new stuff about the craft, and I figure if I can learn something from any book, if I get one thing out of it, it makes me a better writer. That's kind of I'm all for it. So,
have you ever written a screenplay that has no structure?
I am more of a planner than a pantser. Like, obviously, like Stephen King will say, swears by the seat of your pants approach. But I'm much more of an outliner and engineer when it comes to that. And then you throw that out, and then you let the character speak to you, and you get in the moment, and things change. But I also I'm a big fan of structure, I have to say. So no, I haven't just sat down and tried to write something, a final product from page one. I kind of construct it over time. I'm a grinder, I guess you could say.
When you begin to write, are you envisioning the people watching the final product, or that doesn't even enter into your mind? You're so involved in the beginning and what's in your own head.
Well, I do. You want to keep the audience in mind somewhat, but you also don't want to pander. Like, if you're in the moment, much as an actor is in the moment, you're trying to find the humanity and the truth behind what you're writing about in any kind of, whether you're doing a superhero show, whether you're doing a big, deep socio-political show like Man in the High Castle. You want to actually find yourself lost in the moment and how the characters are speaking to each other as real people, and that's the joy of discovery that happens when you have enough, for me at least, when you have enough of the structure figured out, that you have the correct characters in the scene, then you're in the moment, and they start to talk to you when it works.
Well, speaking of talking, and this will be my last question, but with dialogue, how much are you refining the dialogue and making sure that you're researching it for that specific time period and trying it out on other people?
Constantly. I mean, there's a constant polish process that goes on for dialogue. And also, we had researchers who were looking to make sure that we didn't use words that didn't exist today. And sometimes they would catch us making an anachronistic, modern kind of like, oh yeah, that doesn't work. We have to change the line. Because of course we all are creatures of pop culture as well. So in Man in the High Castle, which takes place in the early 60s, I had to, avoid references to some of my favorite superheroes.
Okay. Any other terminology, or definitely not the word bro? I mean, that's become part of the culture now. But I mean, were certain things definitely in the 60s we weren't even realizing that wasn't part of the vernacular?
Right. Well, I mean, in the case of Man in the High Castle, it's an alternative world also, where history has turned out differently from the tale of World War II. So a lot of the language that we would use in a first draft kind of would be slightly different, like given the way the world turned out and cultural experience. And in Man in the High Castle, white people are not, the overclass in the Pacific states. They're kind of treated as a oppressed minority, and so there's all sorts of textures that seed into the language when you have that kind of a storyline. So it's an alt history storyline, and language was very important to us, and we had a lot of very smart people making sure that we were polishing it up right to the moments that the cameras rolled.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much.
My name is Margot Lee Shetterly, and I am the author of the book Hidden Figures.
How long did it take for you to write and then sell the book?
Well, writing the book took all told 6 years, a little more than 6 years, or a little less than 6 years actually. I started working on it in December 2010 and really did like 3 years of research before putting together a book proposal, finding an agent, and then finding a publisher. I submitted the book to the final draft in July of this year, and the book was published in September, which was just a couple of months before the movie came out.
So then how did the movie come about? How was it discovered, and then who wanted to take it on? I know Theodore did the screenplay adaptation.
Yep. So what happened is my literary agent, Mackenzie Brady Watson, she got the book proposal into the hands of this network of book scouts, and somehow it landed on the desk of Donna Gelati, who is the producer of the movie. So Donna called me up, and remember, this was only a book proposal at this time. This was like 3 years ago, so I hadn't finished the book. she saw the book proposal and she said, "We are going to make a movie of this story." And so I thought, well, geez, I'm still writing the book. It's not even a book. You want to option my book proposal? I don't even, I've never written a book before. But she believed in that story and, really took a flyer on a first-time author. And that's now the rest is history. Everything that she said on that first phone call has come true.
I know that Hidden Figures is a true story that many did not know before the movie came out. What movie did you see at any time in your life that had the same type of impact that I'm sure many people will feel once they see the film?
Oh wow, that's a hard question. I mean, there's so many movies that are, amazing and inspirational. You kind of put me on the spot here.
Sorry.
I'd have to have to think about it. But I think that in general, the thing about Hidden Figures is that it is, even though it's a work of nonfiction, it's totally a work of imagination, And I think the thing about movies that you do remember, that do inspire you, is that they spark your imagination. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are responding so strongly, is they see something in these women that says to them, wow, I just expanded my imagination of what the world looks like and who I might be.
And you would hear them speaking to you sometimes? I mean, in their own, from your research, did you hear their voices?
I did. I really did. It's so funny that you asked that question. I found myself talking to them and having conversations with them and dreaming about them and thinking about them. I looked at photos of them to know what they looked like at different parts in their life. I listened to their children talk about the gestures, like Dorothy Vaughan, when she got upset, she'd, start putting her finger on the table like this and everybody knew to back off, that she was, a really, a fearless kind of a woman. All of these different things about them until I really felt like they had come back to life and they were my friends, that they were people that and they really were, they became my companions. Of course, in the case of Katherine Johnson, Katherine Johnson is 98 years old. She is very much still with us. And I had just an incredible privilege to spend time interviewing her and getting to know her life firsthand.
Excellent. Thank you. Best of luck. And thank you. So from the beginning of when you wrote your book to being here tonight, what time frame are we talking about? How long was that process?
So 2012, April, I think. Yeah, so this is now 2017, so 4 years. Four and a half years. But it took me a year to write the book. So I was pretty fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did you present the book for adaptation, I guess, for Luke to write it, or how did that whole process turn about?
The process there was, Luke read the book, and then I said to Cecil Films, I've got to take Luke back to India, and take him through the journey that I went through. And I thought that would give him another dimension of feel and atmosphere that he wouldn't sort of get from reading a book. So I wanted to take him back to right from where it started and do the train journey and show him every places that I went to in Calcutta, and then come to Australia and see my friends as well. Because I think, if I didn't have that, then, he wouldn't sort of, the clarity wouldn't be sort of, as clean. So doing this really sort of helped him in regards to writing the script.
Well, for me, Lion has been my favorite narrative for the year, and I'm not just saying that because you're in front of me here. I really am excited to tell others about it, and I have. The whole package is beautiful with the music and everything. For you, I'm wondering, what's been an inspiring film that's touched your life as Lion has touched mine? It could be from any year. It doesn't have to be this year.
It's very relevant, actually, Lion and this other movie that I'm going to tell you. It's called The Joy Luck Club. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's, particularly where the mother and the children meet in the room there. And I'm saying it now because at the end of the movie, that's, I I meet my mother, and it's very touching to me. I have a very soft spot for that movie, but it's an amazing movie that I saw at a young age and remember it still to now.
So when you saw that film, and then when you began working with Luke Davies on the screenplay, did you want people to come away with the same feeling or a similar feeling, or really because it was about your life you weren't able to really remove yourself? Because if that movie impacted you, did you want others to be impacted as well in the same manner?
Well, of course I would have, and that was up to, I guess, Luke to make that variation of that certain situation with Garth to make it come alive. So, I guess that's such a pivotal point in the movie as well. You know, that particular of reuniting together mother and son. And I think the way that Luke has done it is really, really amazing. And he's, he really wanted to get down to the grassroots in regards to those particular, and more specifically that particular sort of scene, because apparently that was the first scene shot. And I couldn't believe it when he told me, but a lot of people. They're so sort of enthralled by that particular scene because it would resonate with a lot of people, especially mothers and people that have lost their mothers as well. But I think, it touches me every time that I see it.
What book for you is been instrumental in the creative process and writing for you, like personally? What book on writing, creativity?
That's a hard one because I've only been really reading Tintin magazines and comics, and sometimes reading Mum's sort of beauty magazines and Cosmopolitan and a few others. But yeah, I'm a first-time author, and so I've never written a book, and went from being sort of into industrial retail sales to just landing in this, to doing this journey, and also all of a sudden becoming an author by being asked to write my memoir.
Now, I understand you're working with your mom on a second book, is that right? Another video, Little Birdie told me, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we are. Look, we're about to start the prequel to Lion, or A Long Way Home, let's say that, which is to do with not so much really me, it's coming to the point just prior to me, which would mostly be to do with their mothers, which is my adoptive mother, my biological mother, and also one more lady, which is Soror Sue, who owns the orphanage, and how those women are all interrelated, and all for the one cause, the humanitarian side, to help others that are more in need. And I think I'm just getting goosebumps just talking about it because it is so unique to have women from oceans apart, from different backgrounds, all wanting to do one thing, and that's to help a child and give him or her another chance of life.
Well, I could stay here all night and talk to you, but I know you have to go. One last question, and that is, for people of an adult age who have a childhood that either they don't remember or there's a lot of unanswered questions, and they're adults, what would you recommend to them on either going home or trying to find out more about their own history so that they know who they are, a sense of themselves?
I'm not too sure, but it's, for me, it was finding closure, and everyone, and for them, I think it's listening to your heart and listening to your dreams, really, because that's what it was for me. In a nutshell, encapsulated. And if they are longing for something that have lost for such a long time, and it's such a weight on their shoulders, then they ought to pursue it, because life is a little bit difficult when you don't know your identity and you don't know your past because it's such an anomaly you can't remember. But give it a valiant attempt and at least try to give answers and closure to something that you can't get answers to, because if you don't try, then you don't know.
Well, thank you and good luck tonight. Thank you, Saru.
I'm Constanza Romero, and I'm here representing my late husband, August Wilson. He did the film adaptation for Fences, and he also wrote the original play, Fences, which played on Broadway in 1984 and 85, and also in 2010 with Denzel Washington.
Can you tell us about, from your observation, what did you see in his work ethic and how he would dive into a story? How did he really create a world on the page?
Well, his work ethic was this. To live was to work, and to work was to live. He was always working. He always was developing his characters. If we sat down to work, we sat down to eat, he was talking about his work. And, his characters were like almost real. He would tell me what a character was doing, and I said, "Oh my God, he robbed a bank," how he developed it, he wrote in longhand, and then he would transfer it to the computer, and then he would always talk in his rhythm, and until it sounded good in his ear, he didn't finalize it yet, because he was all about his poetry was like music, and if it didn't sound right to his ear, he rewrote it and rewrote it. So and that's where you can see that he was a poet first.
What can you share with our viewers about being so close to someone that's so involved in the creative process, and how, in some sense, you're sharing your life with another entity, and that is their work? And how is that?
Well, I'm a costume designer, so we collaborated on a lot of projects. I would be sort of his visual dramaturg, so to speak, because I would find different photos that were inspirational to him, while they were inspirational to me too, because I was doing the costumes. And he would also say the lines out loud, and I would read his first scripts. And, I would say, well, this, what about this character? Could she be this or could she be that? And so the collaboration process was really incredible. But sometimes it was a little too much. We would be, as I said, downstairs eating, and he would go on and on and on and on about the play, and I would just say, "Oh, I've got to go to work." And then he'd follow me up the stairs and eat a sandwich right by my drawing table. But it's all just good memories now.
Any of the characters or one specific character in Fences that was most like him in some sense?
Oh, I have to say that all of the characters are him. And although the character of Rose is definitely inspired by his mother, but I don't think, I think that is the amazing breadth of his work, is that all his characters had little parts of himself, but they were also so imaginatively created. So I can't say that there's one person. For example, when he was a young man, he was like the older son, whose art nobody understood, because he was writing poetry on napkins and menus. So the younger son, not the younger son, but the older son, Lyons, he was sort of like him, carrying around that his pen and paper, like he carries around his instrument, and playing at night, but nobody in his family understanding why the heck they don't get a job.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
And lastly, what can you tell someone about what it's like to share your life with someone who, at some points, maybe they're critical of their own work, and watching them go through days that maybe they didn't feel good about their projects, even though others related to them, but it was just a tough process because they were so close to the material and couldn't see it for what it was?
Yeah, August hated to cut. If somebody said, the play is longer than 3 hours, what are we going to do? So I think that he would be so stubborn and nobody could make him cut something. And then finally, one of the producers, set me aside and said, "Can you tell him that 7 guitars is a little too long?" And actually, I sat down and I could really see where it could be snipped here and there. And I was able to help him do that. But I think that I was one of the only people he really trusted to tell him the truth, as you're saying. And yeah, not every day was inspired. Not every day was a joy, because creating something is not always a joyful process. It has a lot of raw emotions. And you're practically weaving gold. But the raw material is not always the gold that it becomes later.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.
Hi, I'm Howard Rodman. I'm president of the Writers Guild of America West and also chair of the 2017 Scripter Selection Committee.
Curious what you would recommend to beginning writers on trying to publish their screenplays or protect their work. What are some of the first few things you recommend?
Sure. The first thing I recommend to beginning writers is that the only way to absolutely guarantee that you will not have a career as a writer is to quit. And so what I recommend to beginning writers is real simple, real basic, that you write every day in terms of getting your work out there in the world. Even if you're shy or a shoegazer, you have to be aggressive on behalf of your work and get it into the hands of anyone who might conceivably read it, as painful and humiliating as that process is. In terms of protecting your work, you should absolutely copyright it. Put the C in a circle, get the form from the U.S. Copyright Office. You can do it online. It's really simple. And also register with the Writers Guild. The two give very complementary protections for work from new people.
Okay. You were a writer as well, I'm assuming? You've written screenplays? Okay. Can you talk about the first film that inspired you to want to write?
No, I am a writer, see the calluses. And there are so many films that inspired me to want to write that to pick one would be, I think, crazy. But I do remember there's a scene at the end of an old film noir boxing movie called Body and Soul, I believe, written by Abraham Lincoln Polanski, directed by Robert Rawson. And in it there's a boxer, very proud, sort of first-generation, scrappy immigrant boxer, played by John Garfield. And the mob boss is offering him a lot of money not to win the fight, because all the money has been bet the other way. And John Garfield starts talking about his pride and his morals and the ethics of throwing a fight. And the mob boss turns to him and says, "There's addition, there's subtraction. The rest is conversation." And I just thought, whoa, if I could write one of those. And, I think for many of us, we start reading books and watching movies because somebody has built a world and that we can just hide in that world for a while. And then you realize at some point, oh wait, I could build my own sort of purpose-built world that would really fit me. And so the transition from movie-going to reading to writing, I think for many of us is just a slow descent into the pit.
So the first screenplay that you wrote, did you have the similar sort of dream of that was going to be the first one and the one to put you on the map? You know how many new writers think that the first screenplay will open doors in the first draft, actually?
I never had any thoughts like that. I, spent well over a decade writing unpublishable novels before I transitioned to writing unproducible screenplays. So I was under no illusion. I just started having ideas that were movies that weren't quite books. And the first of those screenplays I wrote still has not been produced, but I've gotten tons and tons of work off of it. It's sort of like, of course we can't do this because this is too weird, but, maybe you can do that. And so I don't think I ever really expected, frankly, that anything I wrote would ever get filmed. And when things I write do get filmed, it just strikes me as sort of like the bonus rounds in a pinball game. It's sort of unexpected and really lovely.
And lastly, just wrapping up here, because I know you have to go, and wondering, what do you see as the most common mistakes or some things that new writers should be wary of regarding formatting, structure, things like that?
I would tell beginning writers not to worry so much about formatting and structure. In terms of formatting, there are many really good screenwriting software programs, and some of them you can get for free. And so let them worry about the formatting. In terms of the structure, I think the worst thing you can do is to say, oh my God, my first act didn't end on page 29, I'm a bad writer. If you find real living characters, if you're telling a story that only you could tell, or writing about a place of the world that you know better than anybody else, just let the story tell itself, or let the characters tell the story, and the rest will fall into place.
So just kind of get what, well, for lack of a better term, the vomit draft, excuse my crass analogy, but get that out and then worry about all the other things later after several.
No, I wouldn't even say that. I would just say, I used to work, I was the editor-in-chief of my college newspaper, and there's a big sign in the newspaper office underneath this huge clock that had a blood red second hand, and the sign said, this is a daily, not a weekly. And whenever we were there past midnight, the managing editor would put up another sign that would say, don't get it right, get it written. And I would say the same thing to people starting out writing and to people who've been writing all their lives.
I love it. Thank you.